A poor girl was told to play violin at school as a joke, but her talent left everyone in tears. 10-year-old Linda Stewart stood on that stage, holding a borrowed instrument, while classmates snickered behind her. They thought she'd embarrass herself. Instead, she was about to change their lives forever. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of the small apartment on Maple Street, casting gentle shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Linda Stewart, a 10-year-old with auburn hair braided neatly down her back, sat at the kitchen table, carefully packing her lunch into a brown paper bag that had been used several times before. Her mother, Carol Stewart, hurried around the kitchen in her waitress uniform, the fabric slightly faded from countless washes. At 34, Carol carried herself with quiet dignity, despite the exhaustion that seemed permanently etched around her eyes. She'd been working double shifts at the local diner since Linda's father had left 3 years ago, leaving behind nothing but unpaid bills and broken promises. "Don't forget your permission slip for the music program, sweetheart," Carol said, sliding a folded paper across the table. "Mrs. Patterson says it's important for all the children to participate." Linda looked at the slip with its bold heading, Elementary Music Appreciation Program, Instrument Demonstrations. Her heart fluttered with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. She'd always loved music, often humming melodies she'd heard on their old radio, but she'd never touched a real instrument. "Mama, what if they ask me to play something?" Linda asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We don't have a piano or anything." Carol knelt beside her daughter's chair, smoothing down a strand of hair that had escaped the braid. "You know what, baby girl? Sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the heart, not from fancy instruments or expensive lessons." She kissed Linda's forehead gently. "Just be yourself, and that's more than enough." The walk to Jefferson Elementary took 15 minutes through their neighborhood, where modest houses sat close together, each telling its own story of families making do with what they had. Linda passed Mrs. Chen's garden, where tomatoes grew in coffee cans, and Mr. Rodriguez's front yard, where he was already fixing someone's car before heading to his day job at the factory. These were hard-working people who understood the value of a dollar and the importance of community. Linda felt safe here, surrounded by neighbors who looked out for each other's children and shared whatever they had. As she approached the school's red brick building, Linda could hear the excited chatter of her classmates gathering near the entrance. The Jefferson Elementary Music Room was the pride of the school, with its upright piano, music stands, and collection of instruments that seemed almost magical to a child who'd never seen them up close. Today was special. The local high school's orchestra director, Mr. Harrison, was coming to demonstrate different instruments and encourage students to join the after-school music program. Linda had heard whispers that some of her classmates already took private lessons, their parents driving them to studios across town every week. She clutched her backpack straps tighter, feeling the familiar weight of being different. Not worse, just different. Her mother had taught her that being poor didn't make someone less worthy, but at 10 years old, those distinctions weren't always clear when surrounded by classmates who seemed to have everything she didn't. Walking through the school's hallways, Linda passed bulletin boards covered with student artwork and achievement certificates. She wondered if she'd ever see her name up there, if she'd ever have something special to share that would make people notice her for the right reasons. The morning bell rang, echoing through the corridors as students hurried to their classrooms. Linda took her usual seat in the back row of Mrs. Patterson's fourth grade class, opened her notebook, and prepared for another day of learning. She had no idea that by afternoon, everything would change. Mrs. Patterson's fourth grade class buzzed with anticipation as they lined up for their visit to the music room. Linda found herself near the back of the line, as usual, listening to her classmates chatter excitedly about the instrument demonstrations they were about to witness. "My mom says I'm getting a flute for Christmas," announced Jessica Morrison, tossing her perfectly curled blonde hair. "She's already talked to my piano teacher about adding flute lessons, too." Behind her, Tommy Richards chimed in, "Well, I've been taking violin lessons for 2 years already. My dad says I'm a natural." He puffed out his chest with pride, clearly enjoying the attention from his classmates. Linda walked quietly, her worn sneakers making soft sounds against the polished hallway floors. She'd learned long ago that it was easier to listen than to try to join conversations about things she couldn't afford or experiences she'd never had. The music room was everything Linda had imagined and more. Afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating instruments arranged carefully on stands around the room. A beautiful upright piano sat in one corner, its dark wood gleaming. Violins, flutes, and clarinets were displayed like treasures, each one more fascinating than the last. Mr. Harrison, a tall man with kind eyes and graying hair, welcomed the children with genuine enthusiasm. "Good afternoon, young musicians," he called out, his voice carrying the warmth of someone who truly loved sharing music with others. "Today, you're going to discover the wonderful world of orchestral instruments." The children settled onto the carpet in a semicircle, their eyes wide with wonder. Linda sat cross-legged in the back, trying to make herself invisible while simultaneously drinking in every detail of the instruments around her. "Music," Mr. Harrison began, picking up a violin with reverent care, "is a universal language. It doesn't matter where you come from, how much money your family has, or what language you speak. Music speaks directly to the soul." He placed the violin under his chin and drew the bow across the strings. The melody that filled the room was hauntingly beautiful, something classical that Linda didn't recognize but felt deep in her chest. She found herself leaning forward, completely captivated. When the last note faded, the room fell silent for a moment before erupting in applause. Linda clapped enthusiastically, her heart racing with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "Now," Mr. Harrison said with a smile, "who would like to try holding a violin?" Hands shot up around the room. Jessica waved hers frantically. "Me! Me! I want to try!" Tommy's hand was so high, it looked like he might fall over backward. "I already know how to hold one properly." Mr. Harrison chuckled and carefully selected a few students to come forward. One by one, he showed them how to hold the instrument, how to position their fingers, how to draw the bow across the strings. Some produced squeaky sounds that made everyone giggle. Others managed a few clear notes that earned encouraging applause. Linda watched from her spot on the floor, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She wanted desperately to try, but she knew better than to raise her hand. What if she looked foolish? What if she couldn't do it right? What if everyone laughed? But as she watched her classmates attempt to play, something stirred inside her. The way the violin looked felt somehow familiar, as if she'd seen it in dreams she couldn't quite remember. When Mr. Harrison demonstrated proper bow technique, her right hand unconsciously mimicked the movement. Mrs. Patterson noticed Linda's intense concentration. "Linda seems very interested in the violin," she mentioned to Mr. Harrison during a quiet moment. Mr. Harrison followed her gaze to the quiet girl in the back, noticing how Linda's eyes never left the instrument, how she seemed to absorb every detail of each demonstration. As the session continued with other instruments, Linda remained focused on the violins, as if they were calling to her in a language only she could understand. As the demonstration period drew to a close, Mr. Harrison set down his violin and smiled at the eager faces before him. "Before we finish today, I'd like to invite anyone who hasn't had a chance to try an instrument to come forward. Sometimes the quietest students surprise us the most." His eyes swept the room, landing briefly on Linda, who immediately looked down at her hands. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she felt the weight of attention settling on her. "What about Linda?" Mrs. Patterson suggested gently. "She's been watching so intently, I think she'd love to try." A few students turned to look at Linda, some with genuine curiosity, others with barely concealed smirks. Jessica Morrison whispered something to her friend Madison, and both girls giggled behind their hands. "Oh, come on," Tommy Richards said loud enough for everyone to hear. "She doesn't even take music lessons. My mom says you have to start when you're really little to be any good." Mr. Harrison frowned slightly at the comment. "Actually, Tommy, some of the world's greatest musicians started much later than you might think. Natural talent doesn't follow a schedule." But the damage was already done. Linda felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as more whispers rippled through the group. She could hear fragments. "Never even seen a violin up close. Probably can't even read music." This should be interesting. Madison Cooper, one of the more popular girls in class, turned around with a sweet smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Linda should totally try. It would be so educational for all of us." The way she said educational made Linda's stomach twist. She recognized that tone, the same one kids used when they wanted to watch someone fail for their own entertainment. Mrs. Patterson, sensing the undercurrent of meanness, stepped forward. Linda, you don't have to if you don't want to. There's no pressure. But something in Linda's expression had changed. The hurt was still there. But it was being joined by something else. A quiet determination that her mother would have recognized immediately. Carol Stewart had faced down plenty of people who underestimated her over the years, and she'd passed that quiet strength to her daughter. I'd like to try, Linda said softly, rising to her feet. Mr. Harrison's face lit up with approval. Wonderful. Come on up here, Linda. As she walked to the front of the room, Linda could feel 20 pairs of eyes following her every step. Her worn jeans and simple t-shirt seemed to glow under the classroom lights, marking her as different from her classmates in their name-brand clothes and new sneakers. Jessica leaned over to Tommy and whispered, "This is going to be painful to watch." Tommy snickered. "My violin teacher says it takes months just to learn how to hold the bow correctly. She's going to sound like a dying cat." Mr. Harrison carefully lifted one of the smaller violins from its stand. "This one should be a good size for you, Linda." He handed her the instrument with the same respect he'd shown every other student. Linda accepted the violin with trembling hands. The wood felt warm and smooth beneath her fingers, and for a moment, the whispers and giggles from her classmates faded into background noise. Something about holding the instrument felt right. "Now, let's start with how to hold it," Mr. Harrison began, but Linda was already positioning the violin under her chin, her left hand finding the neck naturally, her fingers curved over the strings in a way that made him pause mid-sentence. Have you held a violin before, Linda?" She shook her head, her eyes still focused on the instrument. "No, sir, but I've watched you, and it looks like this?" Her posture was nearly perfect, better than some students who'd been taking lessons for months. Mr. Harrison's eyebrows rose in surprise, but the classroom behind Linda erupted in barely suppressed snickers. "Beginner's luck," Jessica muttered. "Wait until she tries to actually play something," Tommy added with a grin. Mr. Harrison handed Linda the bow, watching with growing fascination as she accepted it with the same natural grace she'd shown with the violin itself. Her grip was instinctive, her wrist positioned correctly without any instruction. "All right, Linda," he said gently. "Let's see if you can draw the bow across the strings. Don't worry about making music yet. Just try to make a clear sound." Behind her, the whispers had quieted to an expectant hush. Linda could feel her classmates waiting, some hoping she'd succeed, others clearly anticipating failure. The weight of their expectations pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. Jessica Morrison crossed her arms and exchanged a knowing look with Madison. "Here we go," she mouthed silently. Tommy Richards leaned forward in his spot on the carpet, a smug expression on his face. He'd been taking lessons for 2 years and still struggled with bow control. There was no way this girl, who'd probably never even seen sheet music, could produce anything resembling actual music. Mrs. Patterson stood off to the side, her hands clasped together, silently rooting for the quiet student who always sat in the back and never caused trouble. She'd noticed Linda's intense focus during the demonstration, the way the girl seemed to absorb every detail like a sponge soaking up water. Linda closed her eyes for just a moment, remembering the beautiful melody Mr. Harrison had played earlier. She could still hear it echoing in her mind, each note clear and perfect. Something deep inside her seemed to recognize the music, as if she'd been waiting her whole life to hear it. "Take your time," Mr. Harrison encouraged softly. "There's no rush." Linda opened her eyes and looked down at the violin. Her left hand found the fingerboard naturally, her fingers arcing over the strings. She raised the bow, her right elbow lifting to the perfect angle without any conscious thought. "Wait," Tommy called out, unable to contain himself. "She's not even looking at where to put her fingers. You have to know where the notes are." Mr. Harrison held up a hand to quiet him. "Let's just see what happens, shall we?" Linda drew the bow across the strings. The first note that emerged was clear and pure, ringing through the room like a bell. But Linda didn't stop there. Her fingers moved along the fingerboard, as if guided by instinct, finding notes that formed a simple but hauntingly beautiful melody. The classroom fell completely silent. Mrs. Patterson's mouth dropped open. She'd taught for 15 years and had never seen anything like this. The child was playing music, real, recognizable music, as if she'd been studying for years. Mr. Harrison felt goosebumps rise on his arms. In 30 years of teaching music, he'd encountered perhaps 3 or 4 students with this level of natural ability. What Linda was doing shouldn't have been possible for someone who'd never touched a violin before. Linda's eyes were closed now, her face peaceful and concentrated. The melody flowing from the violin was the same one Mr. Harrison had played earlier, but somehow it sounded different coming from her, more emotional, more personal, as if she was telling her own story through the music. Jessica's smug expression had melted away, replaced by wide-eyed astonishment. Tommy's mouth hung open, his earlier confidence completely shattered. Around the room, children who moments before had been preparing to laugh were now sitting in stunned silence. The melody rose and fell like a gentle wave, each note perfectly placed, each phrase flowing seamlessly into the next. Linda's bow technique was flawless, producing a tone that was warm and rich and impossibly mature for someone her age. When she drew the final note to a close, letting it hang in the air like a prayer, the silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then, from somewhere in the back of the room, someone began to clap. The applause started with Mrs. Patterson, who couldn't help herself. Her hands came together in slow, deliberate claps as tears welled up in her eyes. She'd been teaching for 15 years, but she'd never witnessed anything quite like what had just happened in her classroom. One by one, the other students joined in. Madison Cooper, who'd been prepared to laugh just minutes before, found herself clapping enthusiastically, her earlier meanness forgotten in the face of something truly extraordinary. Even Tommy Richards, his face still slack with shock, began to applaud, though he looked like he couldn't quite believe what he'd just heard. Mr. Harrison stood frozen for a moment, his professional composure completely shattered. In 3 decades of music education, he'd heard thousands of students attempt their first notes on various instruments. What Linda had just done defied every expectation, every rule he thought he knew about musical development. "My goodness," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Linda, that was absolutely remarkable." Linda opened her eyes slowly, as if awakening from a beautiful dream. For a moment, she looked confused by the applause, blinking in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the classroom windows. She'd been so lost in the music that she'd forgotten where she was, forgotten about her classmates and their expectations. Did I do okay?" she asked quietly, lowering the violin from her chin. Mrs. Patterson wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Okay? Oh, sweetheart, that was magnificent. I've never heard anything so beautiful from a beginning student." The applause continued, growing stronger. Jessica Morrison found herself on her feet, clapping harder than she ever had in her life. "Linda, how did you do that? I've been taking piano lessons for 3 years, and I can't play anything that pretty." Other students began standing up, their faces reflecting a mixture of amazement, respect, and something approaching awe. The quiet girl they'd barely noticed before had just transported them to another world with nothing but a borrowed violin and pure, natural talent. Mr. Harrison approached Linda carefully, as if she might disappear if he moved too quickly. "Linda, I have to ask, are you absolutely certain you've never played violin before? Never had any musical training at all?" Linda shook her head, still holding the instrument with reverent care. "No, sir. We can't afford lessons. I don't know how to explain it. When I held the violin, it felt like I knew what to do, like the music was already inside me, waiting." The simplicity and honesty of her answer sent chills through the room. Several students exchanged glances, suddenly ashamed of their earlier assumptions about their classmate. Tommy Richards raised his hand tentatively. "Mr. Harrison, I've been taking lessons for 2 years, and I still can't play anything that sounds half as good as what Linda just played. How is that possible?" Mr. Harrison looked at Linda with something approaching reverence. "Sometimes, young man, we encounter what we call a natural gift. It's incredibly rare. Perhaps 1 in 10,000 students might have this level of innate musical ability. Linda appears to have what we call perfect pitch and an intuitive understanding of musical phrasing that most professional musicians spend years trying to develop." He turned to address the entire class, his voice gaining strength and excitement. "Children, you've just witnessed something truly special. This is why we never, ever judge someone's potential based on their circumstances or appearance. Talent doesn't care about the size of your house or the brand of your clothes. It exists in the most unexpected places, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Linda carefully handed the violin back to Mr. Harrison, her hands trembling slightly. "Thank you for letting me try," she said softly. "Oh, my dear," he replied, his eyes twinkling with possibilities. "I think this is just the beginning." Word of Linda's extraordinary performance spread through Jefferson Elementary like wildfire. By the time the final bell rang that afternoon, teachers were stopping Mrs. Patterson in the hallways, asking if the rumors could possibly be true. "You should have seen it, Margaret," Mrs. Patterson told the principal during their brief encounter near the office. "I've been teaching for 15 years, and I've never witnessed anything like it. The child has a gift, a real, genuine gift." Meanwhile, Linda walked home in a daze, her mind still echoing with the music she'd created. The same route she'd taken that morning, past Mrs. Chen's tomato plants and Mr. Rodriguez's front yard garage, looked somehow different now, as if the world had shifted slightly on its axis. When she pushed open the door to their small apartment, Carol Stewart was already home from her afternoon shift, still wearing her waitress uniform and counting tips at the kitchen table. "Hi, baby girl," Carol called out without looking up. "How was school today? Did you enjoy the music program?" Linda set down her backpack slowly, unsure how to begin. "Mama," she said quietly, "something happened today." Something in her daughter's tone made Carol look up immediately. She'd heard that voice before, the same wonder Linda had used as a toddler when she discovered butterflies in their tiny garden. "What kind of something, sweetheart?" "I played a violin today, in front of the whole class." Carol smiled gently. "That sounds wonderful. Was it fun?" "Mama, I think I might be good at it." Before Carol could respond, there was a knock at their door. Through the thin walls, they could hear an unfamiliar man's voice saying, "Mrs. Stewart, my name is David Harrison. I'm from the school district's music program." Carol opened the door to find Mr. Harrison standing on their small porch, still wearing the same kind expression Linda remembered from the classroom. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by," he said respectfully. "I wanted to speak with you about your daughter's remarkable talent." 20 minutes later, Carol Stewart sat at her kitchen table, with tears streaming down her face, as Mr. Harrison explained what had happened that afternoon. "Mrs. Stewart, in 30 years of teaching music, I've encountered perhaps 3 students with Linda's level of natural ability. What she did today, playing a complex melody perfectly after hearing it only once, with no training whatsoever. It's extraordinary." Carol looked at her daughter, who sat quietly beside her, still processing the day's events. "But we can't afford lessons," she said softly. "I can barely manage rent and groceries." Mr. Harrison leaned forward earnestly. "That's why I'm here. The district has a scholarship program for exceptional students, full funding for private lessons, instrument rental, everything. Linda would also be eligible for our regional youth orchestra. And eventually, if she continues to develop, there are possibilities for summer music camps and even college scholarships." Linda's eyes widened. "You mean I could keep playing?" "My dear child," Mr. Harrison said with a warm smile, "with your talent, I believe you were meant to keep playing. The question isn't whether you can afford lessons, it's whether the world can afford to let your gift go undeveloped." Carol reached over and took her daughter's hand. "What do you think, baby girl?" Linda looked at the violin case Mr. Harrison had brought with him, then at her mother's hopeful face, then back at the man who had opened a door to a world she'd never dared to imagine. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, please." Linda's story reminds us that extraordinary gifts can be found in the most unexpected places. Talent doesn't depend on wealth, privilege, or perfect circumstances. It simply needs someone willing to give it a chance to shine. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone surprised everyone with their hidden abilities? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear about times when assumptions were proven wrong. If Linda's journey touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe for more inspiring stories that celebrate the amazing potential in all of us. Let us know where you're watching from. Until next time, remember that everyone deserves the chance to show their true colors.